Welcome to the first webinar, Wednesday webinar for FESD Hub Scotland of 2022. And we're really excited to have with us this evening the lovely Suzie Bailey and Sarah Jane Cruz from Partners in Advocacy, and they're going to be bringing to us this evening a really interesting session. So we're expecting a few people to join us. It's just after 8 o'clock. I'm going to give everybody a few moments just to come into the room, virtually as it is, and then we'll get going. Sarah Jane and Suzie are going to give us kind of around 20-minute presentation. I'll turn my camera off so that you can just focus on the two of them. They'll be sharing some slides during that time. If you've not joined us on a Wednesday webinar before, I'm just going to give you a few little hints and tips. So we can't see you, we can't hear you. So whatever's going on in your family home, maybe you've got young ones still up or on their way to bed, or husband eating their tea, or partner eating their tea, or whatever. Perhaps you've got your hair up in a bun, having just had a relaxing bath. That's all fine. We can't see any of it. You have the option of being able to say hi to us in the chat. Please feel free to use that function. That's just, let us know that you're here, where you're from, anything that you'd like to say, about what's happening this evening. But if you've got a specific question that you'd like to put to Sarah Jane or Suzie, then please could you use the Q&A function for that. And you'll find that if you're on a laptop, that's generally hover your mouse down towards the bottom of your screen and you'll find it there along with the chat. If you're on a phone or an iPad, then you might find it somewhere slightly different. But again, if you just move your finger over your device, it should pop up on your screen. So I think that's sort of all the information, if you like, over. We're due to finish at 9 o'clock. We will try and finish on time. This is being recorded and it will be made available at a later date through our YouTube channel. So there is the option, if for any reason you have to leave us, you'll be able to view again. Or in fact, if you just want to view again, share it with a colleague, friend, family member, then please, you'll be able to do so afterwards. So without any further ado, I am going to hand over to Sarah Jane and Suzie. They will give a little bit of introduction about themselves, who they are, and we will be back shortly after that once they've done their presentation with some questions and answers. Thank you very much. Sarah Jane and Suzie, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to try and get my wee presentation up just so that you're not stuck staring at me and Susie's face for the entire time, because that would be awful for you. So I'm just going to try and bring this up and bring the slideshow up. So yeah, welcome. We have been really gratefully asked to come along and take part in this webinar tonight, so thank you so much. And we'll just give you a brief introduction of who we are and what we do. So my name's Sarah Jane Cruz. I get called SJ, and I have been with Partners in Advocacy for just coming up on 3 years as first of all an advocacy worker and then a coordinator, and currently one of the service managers within Partners in Advocacy in the children and young people's sector that we work in. And I will hand over to my lovely colleague Suzie to introduce herself.
Hi, so I'm Suzie Bailey. I'm an advocacy worker for Partners in Advocacy. I've been working with them for about 3 years. Firstly, a flexible advocacy worker, and now I work 3 days a week, and I love it.
Thanks, Suzie. So our hope for the webinar is to share what independent advocacy is, how it can help, to give you an overview of who we are and as Partners in Advocacy and our services, give some real life examples and situations where advocacy might be able to help. I often find that advocacy can be quite an abstract thought if you haven't come across it before. So it certainly helped me when I was starting off in the sector to hear some real life examples, and then to answer any questions you might have. The original plan was to kind of talk about our national service, My Rights, My Say, which we absolutely will do, but we'll throw in other services that we have across Scotland, so that if there's ever something that comes up in your sort of day-to-day life, so you hear about, someone needing support and it pops up in your head, that we might be able to be of service. So Yeah, a little bit about Partners in Advocacy. Partners in Advocacy started as part of Bernardo's in the 1980s and is one of the oldest established advocacy projects in Scotland. And we became completely independent in 1998. And I'll go on in a little bit to talk about the difference between advocacy and independent advocacy. So we've got a head office in Edinburgh. Unfortunately, we're not using much of our offices at the moment. What with COVID, we've all been working from home for the last almost 2 years, which is really, really scary. But the head office in Edinburgh, our Edinburgh services provide advocacy for adults and older people. And I'll tell you a little bit about that sort of later on as well. And our main children's advocacy services operate from our Glasgow office, and we offer a children and young adult service in Dundee as well. We are commissioned by a wide range of funders, and all our services are completely free for the young people who need them. So we have services that are commissioned by the government, by local authorities, health and social care partnerships, by different organisations such as Youth Health Service, or for example, we've got a service that we'll talk about that's commissioned by the place itself, a residential unit itself. So we're wide ranging with the people who fund our services. And we are also full members of the Scottish Independent Advocacy Alliance, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. So we deliver independent advocacy services, meaning we're completely independent and able to share the person that we're working with's views without conflict. And you might wonder why that's important. So independent advocacy is a service that helps people to uphold their rights and supports them to have their voice heard and decisions being made about them that affects their lives. It ensures that the person is heard, and not only that, remains at the centre of any decision-making process about them. It's free from conflict of interest, which means the advocacy worker is there for that person alone and make sure that their views are expressed. It can also address barriers and imbalances of powers to make sure that people are given a fair chance and that things aren't just a tick box exercise. And all independent advocacy organisations in Scotland follow the principles of independent advocacy set out by the Scottish Independent Advocacy Alliance, which is just a generalised set of rules to make sure that we provide independent advocacy the way it's supposed to be. So why is independence important in advocacy? And I guess the answer to that is that we don't have any outside occurrences to sort of be beholden to. It means that advocacy is our only focus, and the focus within that is the person and their views. Due to not having any other roles in the situation, we can't be seen as biased. So we're not also there to, do reports for someone else or have a hand in it. We're there just to be there for that person and make sure they have all the information that they need and to put their views across. As I said, we have one job: to uphold the rights and ensure the views are heard for the person that we're working with. And we can sometimes challenge as a professional in a way that may be hard for a family member to. For example, if you're working with the school with regards to your child, it might be quite hard for you to challenge a decision because you're wanting to keep a good relationship with the school. But for us as professionals, if that's what the young person or person we're working with is asking us to do, then that's absolutely something that we can go in and do. And we as professionals aren't perhaps as close to the situation, so we can go in and sort of share the person that we're working with views. And also independent advocacy can be really important and helpful if there's conflicting views within a family, to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. And it might be that the person doesn't necessarily get what they want, but their views and how they feel is taken into account in the process. So there's lots of things that an individual might need advocacy support with as we go through and talk about the different services that we have. There'll be lots of different things that come up, but some of the generalised ones, the My Rights, My Say service that we're going to talk about is all about education, school. There can be upcoming tribunals, court-related cases, homelessness, family relationships, additional support needs not been met, upcoming meetings with social work, children's hearings, child or adult protection issues, and many, many, many more things that advocacy might be able to support with. So I've put in a little bit here about what an advocacy worker should do and what an advocacy worker shouldn't do. So we as advocacy workers are directed by the people who use our services, and we take referrals from anyone and everyone, but the person who is using the advocacy themselves has to engage and want to be involved with advocacy. We've got dedicated and trained workers on each project who are cross-trained in all projects in case a person's needs should change. So for example, we have, our education project, but should the young person not need us in the education project anymore and need us for perhaps a children's hearing, we might have a worker that's cross-trained in both so that the young person could stay with that advocacy worker that they've built up the trust with. We do take our time and we build up a trusting, confidential partnership with the people who use our service, and it needs to be directed with them what they would like shared. So for example, if a young person tells us about stuff that's going on in school, and they'll maybe tell us 2 or 3 things and say that at the moment they only want one shared, they're in control of that process. We do follow all correct child and adult protection procedures, and when situations arise where we can't maintain confidentiality, that's what happens when you work with young people. Sometimes there does need to be child or adult protection concerns made, but that is talked about with our advocacy partners when we begin working together. We're very clear about our role, what we do, what we won't do, and what we can and can't keep confidential, and we make sure that our young people can understand that. We don't need a formal diagnosis or professionals to be involved to work with a young person, and we'll talk a bit more about additional support needs shortly, being different obviously to disabilities. If there's something going on for a young person, for the majority of our projects, we will be able to sort of help with that. And as I said before, I always feel that the best way to learn, probably because it's how I learn, is to hear real life examples. So as we go through the different services that we have, we'll share some real life anonymised stories about people we've supported and how advocacy can help. I think one thing that I maybe perhaps haven't said here and alluded to is that when I say we take time and build up a trust and confidential partnership with the people who use our service, we absolutely do. We also tailor the service to the young person who's using advocacy. So for example, at point of referral, we have a question that asks, what's the young person's interest? And we get to take a real interest and use that to build a relationship with them. And for some young people, it might take, a few weeks to trust their advocacy workers. For some other young people, it can take longer, but we take that time to work with the young person as long as we're sure they want to work with us, and we tailor our support to a way that works for them. For example, during COVID, our whole way of working has changed. There was a time where we weren't able to go out and see young people face to face, but what that really highlighted for us was that actually some young people really like the virtual way of working and prefer it, in fact, to someone sitting, in their living room or across for them in school, and love the fact that they could just, shut the laptop lid down in their advocacy worker once they were finished talking about whatever it was they wanted to talk about, and that they were in control. So we tailor our partnerships to the individuals that we work with, and we just feel like that's best to do to keep the young person in control. So what should an advocacy worker not do? On the flip side, we can't work with a young person if they don't want to work with us. As I said there, we can take things slow, build up a relationship, but no matter how much a person might benefit from advocacy, we can't force them. So that's, if you can see a clear way forward for an advocate to work with a young person. If the young person's resistant to that, we simply don't go there. As much of a young person's right not to have an advocacy worker as it is for them to, and sometimes as adults, we can see a clear path forward and know how much it would benefit a young person, but if it's not a young person's choice, we can't and won't force them. We take information at time of referral, but we have to check all of it with the person that we're working with. We don't hold any secrets or information back from the person that we're working with, as we need to be in equal terms with the person. We're called partners in advocacy, but the young people that we work with, we call advocacy partners, because it's a 50-50 equal relationship, and we work with them, so we won't hold anything back that's been shared with us from our advocacy partners, unless there's a risk of harm coming to that young person from them knowing the information. We also don't tell someone what to do or make decisions for them. We're there to support the person's rights and share views. We can gather information for them. We can give them, you know, lots of information about other services or about a particular road that they want to go down, but we ourselves don't have our own views or judgments on a situation. And as I said, we can provide information on the options that we give our young people. So what is an additional support need? So pretty much in terms of the service I'm about to talk about in a little minute, My Rights, My Say, which is a nationwide service, an additional support need for that purpose is really so wide. I'll just bring them up on the screen just now. There can be traditional disabilities or additional support needs such as autism, learning disabilities, ADHD, hearing, visual, motor, health needs, which obviously can use the service, but also there's other additional support needs that quite often what we found is young people don't find themselves to have an additional support need when they have something like English as a second language, or being highly able, or being a young carer, being care experienced, or being part of the travelling community, or most often than not, young people who are going through a, you know, a traumatic or emotional time, bullying, bereavement, social and emotional factors don't see themselves as having an additional support need. But if a young person is going through something or is having an issue, we would say, you know, that there's something there and there is an additional support need, especially for My Rights, My Say, because that can really impact upon their education. And speaking of My Rights, My Say, I think that's where I'm going to get on my soapbox now, so excuse me. But My Rights, My Say is really my passion project. I have been involved with it for almost 3 years, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. It's a service that covers the whole of Scotland, which is brilliant. It's nationwide. There is an age range on it, unfortunately. It's 12 to 15 for young people with additional support needs, the kind of needs that I've just covered there. And it's for them to exercise their rights within education. So the Additional Support for Learning Act was amended in 2018, extending some of the rights to children and young people 12 to 15 to have some of the same rights as their parents. Now, they don't get all of the same rights as their parents. For example, they don't get to make like a placement request for schools, but they do have rights kind of included in the second bullet point, such as they have the right to have their views heard, to request the CSP, to have someone support them at a tribunal, and to have advocacy to help them get their views across to not only their school but their local authority. And that's where Partners in Advocacy comes in. My Rights, My Say is a partnership between Partners in Advocacy, Care and Legal, Inquire and Children in Scotland, and we all have our own individual parts. Partners in Advocacy provide the advocacy part of it, funnily enough. Care and Legal provide the legal part. Inquire provide information and onward referrals onto each of the other three parties. And Children in Scotland take children's views as part of a planning or dispute process. So Children in Scotland and Partners in Advocacy might seem like quite a similar process, but Partners in Advocacy is where the young person is leading on the process, and Children in Scotland collect views where perhaps it's a placement request or it's going to tribunal and the young person isn't the one driving it forward. The age range of 12 to 15, 12 is a lower age range because that is the age that a young person is deemed to have capacity, and it stops at 15 because young people all get these rights when they turn 16. So what we aim to do within My Rights, My Say is support young people to engage within their education and get the right support. Without the right support, you know, the school experience can be really difficult and could be stopping them from learning, and it can be hard for young people to communicate their needs to the school and challenge the school when these needs aren't being met. The young person in My Rights, My Say is, as I said before, is the lead. They are the one exercising their own rights, so they need to have capacity to do that, which means that they don't need to understand every single thing about the legislation, but they do have to understand what it is they're asking for, and you know who their advocacy worker is, and just have that general sense of what exercising their rights means. And also there's another caveat on it, that exercising their rights can't adversely affect their well-being, which means that, you know, exercising their rights doesn't make them unduly stressed or have a negative effect on them physically or emotionally. So I think that's probably about as much in one go as you can take of hearing my voice continue. So I've brought along the lovely Suzie, who's going to give us some real life examples of My Rights, My Say in action and her experience with it.
Okay, thank you, Sarah Jane. So I had a big problem trying to decide which of the young people I would suggest that I talked about. So I've come up with a young person who I started to work with because their parents referred them to the My Rights, My Say, feeling that their voice wasn't being heard in school. Now, this young person had dyslexia and dyscalculia, and really wanted to make sure that any assessments that she was going to get extra time, that she would get paper, I think it was pink paper she needed for things to be written on, and wanted the school to make sure that to ensure that they could arrange that for her. So we had a long conversation about what was good for her and what she really wanted, and then we arranged a school meeting that we all did virtually, and that was it was very successful for her. She went on, actually, because this was just before complete lockdown, and unfortunately during lockdown we were still in contact, and she got some she had poor mental health during the COVID lockdown, so asked me to speak to the school to see what support they could put in place to make sure that she could continue her learning. So we did that, and I think they managed to get her into school for a day, so that this was just helping her get through that lockdown time. So I mean, we obviously make sure that the young people know their rights, and take them to the Education Authority and to the school, and it, as Sarah Jane was saying, it is very much a partnership. There's quite a lot of other things we can do. We can do CSPs, and and we don't do them. We can help the young person do them, or ask for them. We can ask for specific assessments if that's what the young person would like. So that was my example of a young person in My Rights, My Say. I've changed it 3 times today, I think.
It's definitely changed since the last time I heard it, but a wonderful example. Thanks, Suzie. Yeah, the majority of our chat tonight was going to be on My Rights, My Say, and I kind of felt as though we were missing a trick, because Partners in Advocacy have got loads of different projects. So I'm going to give you a wee added extra and a whistle-stop tour of the other things that we provide at Partners in Advocacy. We have our children's hearing service, and I really need to slap my hand from saying that it's a new children's hearing service, because it's been up and going for well over a year now, a year and a half, I think. But the children's hearing service does exactly what it says in the tin. It supports young people between the ages of 5 to 18 going through the children's hearing system, and the reasons for attending a hearing could be, you know, school non-attendance, child protection issues, offending behaviours, and various other additional support needs. And what our service does is it supports children and young people to understand the grounds for the hearing, to help them prepare and to participate in the hearing the way they would like to, if they so wish, to ensure that their views are heard, and to have their rights upheld and access legal advice and representation when required. I've put up a list of areas that we cover in Scotland as a primary provider for the children's hearings. I'll let you guys read them. I'll not read them to you, partly because I can not pronounce half the places in Scotland. And we're also the alternate provider in a load of other places, which means we can work in these areas with a young person if there's a conflict or issue with the primary provider, or if we're already working with the young person on another advocacy matter. You will very quickly get used to Suzie being my very able and glamorous assistant, because she also supports, or has supported, young people with the children's hearing service within PIA, and she's going to give us another fantastic example.
This one, yes, this one I haven't changed. I had a lovely young person who, due to an advocacy worker not being able to deal with this, I stepped in really at the last minute. This was a hearing that had been deferred, and this young person wanted to give their views on spending time with mum, dad, their siblings, and what it was like to live in with a kinship placement. So we did quite a lot again, this was all virtual. It was during COVID, and we had some great conversations. He got an army outfit and wore it with great pride, and wore it to the hearing with great pride, and he was able to pass on his views. He went to the hearing, but he was quite happy to sit in the background, let his views be said for him, listen to what was being said, but not have to say them himself, but know that it was done for him. So it gave everyone the opportunity to hear his views independently, and he ended up being very happy that that could be done. So that's my example of the children's hearing.
Thank you, Suzie. We have the Glasgow Youth Independent Advocacy project, which we shortened to GIA. And it supports any vulnerable child or young person up to 19 living in Glasgow. So any young person that's got an experience of ACEs. We receive a large number of referrals from the Glasgow Youth Health Service, which are part funders of GIA. And we work with young people who have been involved in child welfare hearings, child protections, chaotic backgrounds, homelessness, substance misuse. Yeah, absolutely. It goes on and on and on and on. Education issues, mental health issues. The really great thing about GIA is that it can work with multiple issues at the one time. So, for example, this is my really bad example of the amazing work that GIA can do. We supported a young person who was going through a really traumatic time and was homeless, not only to, you know, make the right connections with housing officers, get a flat, but also we supported them with to signpost to mental health charities. We found somewhere for their pets to go while they were, you know, couch surfing, waiting on their accommodation. It's a really well-rounded service that is much needed, but unfortunately we're currently searching for continuation funding for the project, as it's due to come to an end in June when the funding for that stops. So we're positive, and we're keeping our hopes high that we will find more funding for it, because it's a really great service that we operate within Glasgow. We've also got the East Renfrewshire project, where we're commissioned by East Renfrewshire Health and Social Care Partnership to deliver independent advocacy for vulnerable children and young people up to 18 in East Renfrewshire, and priorities given to child protection issues or significant mental health issues or complex needs transitioning into adulthood. And you'll think we just use Suzie for absolutely everything, which we absolutely do, but she's got a particularly good tale of a young person that she supported within East Renfrewshire.
I had the most amazing young man. Oh no, young person. Sorry, SJ.
Carry on.
So this young person was non-verbal. There was a serious child protection issue that around him, and he had disclosed some information that really everyone wanted to have it independently verified, that this was information that he was sharing. So we again, this had to be done virtually. He was able to communicate with a keyboard, but needed some help from the school to be able to do that. So to make the situation slightly less threatening for him and more kind of friendly to him, we had a glove puppet called Tweety, who talked to him and he talked to Tweety. He was really rather fond and liked meeting Tweety each week. So we confirmed the child protection issue. We were able to pass that on to social work, and it was independently verified. His issues were independently verified by us, and it thankfully ended that the child protection imminent issue was removed at that point. So he's still receiving advocacy, but for other reasons, not for that absolute imminent child protection issue. There we go.
Thanks, Suzie. And yeah, Tweety was a great help, and as I said before, we will always endeavour to work with a young person in the absolute way that works best for them. We have our Glasgow Mental Health Project, also, which covers the Greater Glasgow and Clyde for children and young people who are inpatients, either in Skye House or for Ward 4. Our advocacy workers support young people who are detained under the Mental Health Act, and they inform them of their rights to independent advocacy, legal advice and representation, to support them to have their views heard whilst in hospital, and to help prepare them attend mental health tribunals and other formal meetings. Our previous contract allowed us to work with young people in the community, but for the renewed project, we are working with children and young people who are detained only. And just to give you a really quick flavour of what that can look like, if a young person's detained under the Mental Health Act, we support them to go to their tribunal, we gather their views, we can appoint a solicitor for them. But one of the most interesting cases I think we've had recently is a young person who was being moved from their place within Skye House to another hospital, and they and their advocacy worker worked really hard to get the young person's views across, appointed the solicitor, and put in an application to stop that transfer being completed, and they actually won their case, and the young person got to remain within Skye House, which they were really happy about. So yeah, really good for that project and supporting young people. Pardon me. We have our project up in Dundee, which provides independent advocacy for all children and young people who have been detained or who are at risk of being affected by the Mental Health Care and Treatment Act. But in Dundee, we can also work with mental health in the community, along with working with young people with learning disabilities, transition issues, education issues, communication issues, young people who are isolated, who are young parents. There's a lot of work that we can do with young people up in Dundee, and it's a similar service to GIA in that we can work with a young person on a lot of different issues. For example, there's an ongoing case in Dundee just now where we're supporting a young person with access to housing and being a homeless young person, but also with issues within their placement and their workplace, and generalised signposting to mental health resources as well. So it's a really nice rounded project. And we also have our St Mary's Commure project, which is a project that provides advocacy to young people in the St Mary's unit, which is a secure residential care unit, which also provides them with education. And young people there are usually referred there under a court order or from children's hearings, and we support them to have their views heard and their rights upheld. And an example of that could be, you know, supporting a young person to a hearing about them being detained within St Mary's, or we also have group sessions within St Mary's where young people can bring any sort of like issues that they're having to the group and talk about, you know, we want the menus changed, or we need new films or facilities in the unit, and they have their voice heard that way, which is brilliant. We also have our adult services. I realise that a large proportion of this sort of chat tonight has been on children and young people services. That's because that's my background and that's where I'm most comfortable talking about. But we do have adult services in Edinburgh, Mid and East Lothian. Our Edinburgh service provides advocacy for 16 plus adults with a learning or physical disability, and for older people as well. And we have an advocacy service for adults with a learning disability who are long-term hospital patients as well. And within Mid and East Lothian, we support adults with a learning disability as well. So the crux of some of the reason why we're here today is to talk about care experienced young people and the benefit that advocacy can have to young people who are care experienced, particularly within our My Rights, My Say project, because care experienced young people get those rights as well as all other young people when they turn 12. But those rights that a young person gets at 12 parents have before that. And so care experienced young people might not have the luxury of having a parent who's able to exercise the rights on their behalf. Yeah, exactly as I've said there, they might need some support to be able to get their educational needs met. It's well known that care experienced young people have poorer educational outcomes, and we want to really make a difference so that any young person can have the education experience that they want to have. Young people who are care experienced are also seen as having an additional support need already due to their experience. So it is something that, you know, we can support any care experienced young person with as their education within My Rights, My Say. And the key reason, apart from Suzie just being amazing, that I've brought Suzie along tonight is that Suzie's got some real life experience about how this impacts her and her family and what it's like for her. So Suzie, I will absolutely hand over to you.
Thank you. So I'm a foster mum. I have a young person who is 13. We have gone through from nursery through primary school, and we're now into secondary school. It's not been, I don't think there's one part of education that has been easy at all. I think I was actually asked not to attend school for quite some time and not to even turn up. Sometimes it's very difficult, and it's very difficult not to take it really personally. So when my young person turned 12, they got Advocacy, and all of that, I'd been saying for quite some time that my young person was really unhappy in education, and I was being told that that wasn't the way that they were presenting. It was my imagination. They were only saying that at home. Whereas when they got an advocate, they absolutely got the opportunity to say how unhappy they were and how unfair they found the education system. So it took that immediate pressure away from me being the one that was always saying they're really unhappy, and everyone going, well, that's not actually how this is presenting, you know, maybe you should look at different things. And one example that I love is it gives me that wee separation and that step back, because they didn't want to have the guidance teacher that they were assigned to. And I knew that if I had gone in and asked that this guidance teacher was removed, it would definitely have been thought that this was coming from somewhere that I wanted. So I asked them to contact their advocacy worker and put that request through, so that it was a request on their behalf, not rather than me doing it for them, which gave me the freedom to go and actually really look for the support and look for the things that were going to make a difference without causing myself to be really unpopular within the school. So those are some of the kind of things that I found have been really, really, really helpful. Being a mum with a young person who has an advocacy worker. So
thanks so much, Suzie. That's so helpful. And yeah. So I've put in a little bit of a slide saying, what if we can't help? You'll have noticed that we have projects, and there are, I don't want to say limitations, but there are criteria for accessing those projects. So for example, for My Rights, My Say, it needs to be between 12 to 15, somewhere in Scotland, and it needs to be an education related matter. So what do Partners in Advocacy do if we can't help? We try our absolute best. If we don't have a project that suits, we point people in the right direction to someone who can help. The SIA website has a function to search for an advocacy worker within your own area. So you can look that up. Inquire is a great resource for education, and it's there's loads and loads of information there. But the one thing that I would say is, give us a call. If you can't find anything at all, you can always phone us. We can't make promises to find something, because for some things it's really difficult to find, but we have really knowledgeable staff, and we'll do our best to get something that supports a person, even if it's not ourselves. I have put up some information on how to make a referral. So there's loads of ways to get in touch with us. There's our website, there is our duty number, which is opened 10 till 4, Monday to Thursday, and 9 till 1 on a Friday, soon to be 10 till 4 on a Friday also. There is our online referral form, but that's for the Children's Hearing Service only at the moment. And we do have an email address for general inquiries. But I would say if there's something here that you've thought that might be, you know, beneficial or useful, pick up the phone and you know, have a chat with us. And yeah, I think that's the end of my presentation. You'll be so glad to hear. I will stop sharing, and then I think Alice might have some questions for us.
Thank you so much, guys. That was so interesting. And
You've gone back on mute.
sorry, we had some, thank you for that, Suzie. We've had some really interesting or insightful comments as well in the chat function. Somebody just saying that they really recognise the benefit of an advocate, particularly within the hearing system as a panel member themselves. So actually, you know, they're seeing that in practice. So that's really encouraging to hear. And another parent who is saying how listening to this and hearing about advocacy and helping and hearing how it helps instantly, I think as a parent, you know, that sounds very encouraging, that your story, Suzie, as a parent yourself experiencing advocacy for your child, is giving this parent encouragement. And actually they're then asking, though what you've mentioned with my rights, my say is obviously for 12 to 15-year-olds. So is there anything for younger children, is the first question.
Yeah, absolutely. At the moment, I've briefly skipped over it, but just to go back into it in more detail. So my rights, my say is for any young person with an additional support needs, but it is 12 to 15. The reason for that is that the age of capacity for a young person to exercise their rights starts at 12. There is scattered support depending on, you know, additional support needs in what areas for young people younger than 12. So for example, if it was an education issue and it was in Dundee or Glasgow, we would be able to pick that up under our other projects. But there's also national services like Mind Room and National Autistic Society that can sort of help in those situations. We really do wish that there was blanket advocacy for any young person that needs it, regardless of criteria. That's the world I hope that I will get to see in my professional career. We're not quite there yet, but it would be fabulous, wouldn't it? But yeah, that's why the age range is there, I'm afraid, is because 12 is the assumed age of capacity.
So the best thing people could do in the situation where they've got an under 12 is get in touch with the helpline. That would be right, wouldn't it, with your helpline, to ask that question, to find out.
Or Inquire are absolutely a fabulous service. They are so good.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, yeah, just somebody else saying they hadn't thought how advocacy would be helpful in education. I think that's going to come through quite loud and clear this evening for lots of parents. I'm sure that penny is dropped from your personal story that you've shared there, Suzie. So I think you might be busy in the next few weeks. So we've got a question here about how do you go about supporting families where there is no diagnosis for a child, perhaps where the school doesn't accept that their child has additional needs?
Yeah, absolutely. Suzie, are you happy for me to take this one? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, as I said before, we don't have to have an official diagnosis. An additional support need is if the young person is having an issue within school, that's something that we can help and support with, and we support that young person by getting to know them. Do you know, if the parent or carer is willing to sort of give us, this is what works well, we start there, or we can start from fresh. And because My Rights, My Say is based in legislation, we go straight to the Education Authority with an introductory letter and mandate, and then we start building up the relationship from there. It shouldn't be that a young person needs an official diagnosis to get support, the support should be there regardless. And that's why My Rights, My Say is for additional support needs and not just classified disabilities, as there's so many young people that need extra help within school that wouldn't be classed as having a traditional disability. So I hope that's kind of answered that question.
Yeah, so that could be not diagnosed with a particular condition, but also could be anxiety, could be around sexual identity, could be, transitioning from primary to secondary, could be, something happened in the family unit. So there could be lots of reasons for additional support needed, not necessarily a diagnosis. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely loads. English as a second language, highly able pupils, there's loads of things that mean a young person isn't getting the best out of their education and need help to be able to do that, and that's where kind of we come in.
Yeah, perfect, thank you. So we've got a really interesting question here, is what tools can be used to gain and share the views of a child who is neurodivergent? So what kind, you talked about Tweety.
Yeah.
What other tools do you use, or could parents maybe try using themselves?
Suzie, do you want to take this one and I'll pick up on anything else? Or
I'll probably not remember them all, but certainly, I mean, we do talking mats, which we can do digital talking mats, which are quite useful, because that's allowing a young person to almost take control of with non-verbally telling us what's happening, and then it can lead to other areas. So talking mats is, I don't know if anyone's unaware what that it's I've opened something up I'm going to have to explain badly. It's
virtually as well, yeah.
It's a set of cards that you would allow you would ask a young person to place where they felt that this was going well, not going so well, or in the middle, and then that usually leads to more conversation about what's working well and what's not working well for them. So that's a good process. There was Tweety, but Tweety was an exception. Tweety's now retired, but I do have, there is horse and pig there, so if we ever need to get to that point. I think taking the lead as well on the main, from the main carer, from the main person, to let us know what their real interests are, and to be able to quite often, I'm going to stereotype here, but quite often with boys it's Minecraft or Fortnite or something like that you can have a chat with. I've got and that is very much stereotyping, but I have a couple of young ladies who are really interested, well, one in particular who's really interested in Henry VIII, and I know more about Henry VIII than I ever thought I would. So if it's a matter of, I suppose, I like using a little bit of humor to be able to relax the young person, to ask the questions that you go, okay, that's really interesting. Now can we find out a bit more about that? So there's no one size that fits all. It's finding a way that people say that really works well, and this is what's worked for me, and just being open to being inquisitive and finding out how that young person wants to communicate with you. Would be a long answer to that question, and Sarah Jane will come up with lots of wonderful answers now.
No, that's exactly it. It's individualised, tailored support. All our advocacy workers are really highly trained. They all go through, autism, ADHD. We've just done a fantastic training with Mindroom to brush up on all our skills. But it's individual what works for that young person, and sometimes that's going to the people around them that already know them, and sometimes it's starting fresh, but just making sure that we're getting an essence of that young person and how best to support them.
Okay, thank you. A question here, just asking for clarification. So is ASN service available to all care experienced children, irrespective of the length of time in the system? I don't think they mean an ASN service. I think they mean advocacy. So I think the answer is yes, yeah.
Because it's available to all young people 12 to 15 that are having school issues as long as they have an additional support need. So it's available irrespective of how long a young person's been looked after. As if they've got an issue within school, then yeah, we can support them.
Yeah, and even where, and it's a chronological age of 12, even where neurodevelopmentally they may be several years younger than their chronological age.
Yeah, that's where it gets a little bit difficult, because with My Rights, My Say, the young person has to understand their rights to be able to use them. So it doesn't mean that they need to understand the legislation or anything about them, but they need to understand what it is they're asking for. That's where a little bit of capacity sort of comes in. We as advocacy workers never test capacity. That's not our job to do that. The local authority can test capacity. I think in the entire time that we've been working with My Rights, My Say, that's happened a couple of times. It doesn't happen often that the local authority will check a young person's capacity, but we have to make sure a young person understands what it is that My Rights, My Say is, that exercising their rights is, and that they're okay with going through that process.
Okay. So I don't know if the person that asked that question's got anything they want to follow up. Please pop it in quickly because we're nearly out of time. Okay. Sorry, there were a couple of other questions, right? So how does school respond to advocacy workers? This is a good question. Are they welcomed or dismissed?
We get a mixed bag. Most schools are brilliant. Most schools are really welcome working with us because it's a chance to get things right for the young person. It's another view into what can help and support them. Other schools less so, and that's, you know, completely okay. Some schools can be a little bit defensive, but on the whole they've been great, and that's why My Rights, My Say works so well, is because we don't just work with individual schools. The exercising the rights has to go through the Education Authority as well, so it's not just placed on schools but on the Education Authority. So yeah.
Do you find that where maybe relationships have broken down because parents have tried so hard to advocate for their child, and invariably I think we do see that does lead to a lot of frustration for parents. Absolutely. And relationships are broken down, that when an independent advocate has then come in, does that help to maybe repair? Because I think, as Suzie was describing, it would remove some of that anxiety and social emotional anxiety and pressure for the family unit. Yeah. Does that help to restore some of that?
It absolutely does. You know, it's about good working relationships, and we want to get the right things for the young people, and sometimes it can help just having that independent person, as Suzie was rightly saying earlier on, that just comes in and goes, right, okay, no, this is what the young person's asking for. It can take the stress off. We hear from a lot of parents who are like, the school or the Education Authority just think it's me. They just think, you know, I've tried everything and I'm just labelled as a sort of a pest, but my child is so good at masking through the day, they don't see an issue. And that's where we can kind of step in a little bit and work with the young person. And it's a benefit to the family. Although we only work with the young person, we would never say we work with a family, because the young person's in control and they can sort of dismiss us at any time. It can be a huge benefit to the whole family when there's not that stress.
Thank you. So thinking, obviously, FASD Hub Scotland, one of the features of symptoms, characteristics of FASD is that our young people mask, as we've just talked about, but also they have on and off days. So, you know, one day typically they're able to do something, the next day they might not be able to do exactly the same thing. And understanding could quite easily come into that. So how would you deal with that, particularly around the idea of them being able to understand their rights? Would you meet with them a few times to go through that explanation for you to have confidence that they're able to understand?
Yeah, absolutely. We can take as long as it takes for a young person to understand. We have something called a mandate that the young person signs that lets an Education Authority know the young person's given us permission to become involved in their educational journey. So we take as much time as it takes for the young person to, you know, understand that. Obviously, if there's a clear lack of understanding, it wouldn't be right for us to, you know, continue with that relationship because it would cause stress to the young person. and they wouldn't be able to exercise their rights. But for some young people, it can take longer to understand. For other young people, they get it right away. But it's about giving that young person space and understanding and explaining it in a way that they understand and they get. And that's okay. We can take our time and do that. We have that luxury.
Brilliant. Suzie and SJ, thank you so much for coming along this evening. It's been really fascinating listening to you. I can see from all the comments that we've had that this has provoked a lot of thinking, and those that have attended this evening, I am absolutely certain that you are going to be getting a few phone calls from different people. And just before we go, I just wonder if you could leave us maybe with a couple of positives around advocacy. Either being a story, maybe from Suzie, but you know, a reason why we should be encouraging advocacy for our young people, and just if we could end on a positive, that would be great.
Am I allowed to do my young person who's a real high flyer now, SJ?
I think that's probably the most heartwarming one you could possibly hear, Suzie.
I don't notice that there was one question about a waiting list, so maybe you might do waiting.
I've got it in the chat, Suzie, you carry on.
Okay. So I had a young person that I met, I think it's a long time ago, and he has physical disability, motor disability, hearing disability, and visual disability, and he was only allowed into a meeting for the last 5 minutes to be told what had been decided, and he said, I'd really like to go to my meetings. So we actually, from that moment onward, he was sitting outside the meeting when the meeting started, and I said, it's his meeting, he has a right to attend and should be here. So from that moment onward, this young man has just grown wings and is flying. He's taken the local authority to tribunal because they didn't enact his coordinated support plan. He has now gone on to become a member of the Youth Parliament, the Scottish Youth Parliament. He's also a special advisor to the Children's Commissioner, because he now has a voice and is absolutely heard. He still wants me as his advocate, and I'm not sure if I need him more than he needs me, to be honest, at this point. He is, and he takes great delight in being able to say to the school when they say, can we have your views? He said, Suzie will give you my views. And so and you go, this young man is flying high, and that's in 2 years from a young man who wasn't allowed to sit in his own education meetings. So is that a good one?
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you again, ladies. This has been such an informative session. Thank you for everybody that's come and attended, all of the questions that you've put through this evening. We would have been an interesting discussion just with the three of us anyway, but it's made it even more fruitful and rich with all of your questions. So thank you for engaging with us. As I say, this has been recorded. It will be made available on our YouTube channel. So keep an eye out on our social media and we'll let you know when that is available, and you can share the link to it as widely as you like so people can rewatch it, and obviously you'll be able to come back and rewatch it yourselves. So I will say good night. I'll just ask Suzie and SJ to stay on, not disappear, but we'll say good night and thank you to everybody else. Thank you.